Time, everyone. Okay.
Chaim.
I don't want to really discuss history here. If I'm going to say anything, I'll share what I think is on everybody's minds.
Go for it.
And that is, how do you deal with this? Firstly, personally, and how we deal with it with our communities and so on. So though Rabbi Levitin said correct words, but I think we need more explanation because, maybe you're on that madrega that you were able to have Gilu Berada and so on, but I don't know everybody's on that madrega. So I want to just share a little, some thoughts. Since you mentioned the 6-Day War, and since you spoke in Yiddish, I'll speak in English, okay? I was a kid during the 6-Day War. I wasn't old enough to really understand everything that's going on. But many years ago, I did a lot of research. I read through all the sichas from Tovshin Chov Zayin. That summer, the Rebbe fabrengt almost every Shabbos, and including the sichas of Tovshin Chov Ches, Metzoy Simchas Torah, and Yutes Kislev Tovshin Chov Ches. I would suggest required reading. I mean, every sikh is fundamental, but especially those two that I just mentioned, Metzoy Simchas Torah Chov Ches, meaning the second Shabbos Bereishis fabrengen, and Yutes Kislev, because it's very rare that the Rebbe spoke in such an open way. I would even dare to say that Mashiach, it seems to me from those sichas, that Mashiach was as strong then, maybe even stronger than the sichas of Nun Aleph and Nun Beis. The Hoye Toka B'Shefer Godel that Rab Shalom Ber mentioned, the 3 Maimorim, a few other Maimorim about Nevuos Losid Love, including in the Fabrengen of Mitzvah Simchas Torah, where the Rebbe said that he was looking at Sefer Maimorim Yiddish, and suddenly he gechapt that the Frierdiker Rebbe in a Maimer there, where he talks about the Tkiya Shefer, was Menave, said Nevuah, the Nevuah Gluya. We spoke about World War I and World War II, and then the Rebbe said, without even a question, continuing the Nevuah, that now the 6-Day War was a Yitoka B'Shefer Godel. The Rebbe said it Beferish Mamish. And now the big challenge is going to be, is this wake-up call going to lead to the end of the pasuk, which is and Bo Evdim Eretz Asher and the Nedochim Eretz Mitzrayim L'Shtachvis Al Har Kochi, whether that will be fulfilled. Unfortunately, especially in the Moitzois and especially Yutas Kislev Sicha that I mentioned, the Rebbe cried many times. I heard from people, maybe I don't know where you are, whether you are Merkeshlichas, but I heard that only Tisha B'Av, where the Rebbe sobbed through a lot of the Kinus and the Haftarah of Tisha B'Av, was that year, Tovshin Chov Zayin. And to me, it's very clear why. Because the Rebbe, as a real visionary, saw the future. Saw that here was an opportunity of a lifetime, literally a Mashiach opportunity. And but there's always Bchiras Ha'adam, the choice from below. And the Shtachvis Har Kochi, the Rebbe said, Das leider hat man das nicht gewiss. And I would say, without question, I say this without any hesitation, that every tzara and the Bechila Datus that came from 1967 till today, and of course leading to where we are right now, was rooted in the mistakes that were made then. I'm not here to discuss pointing fingers. The reason I'm saying it is because I think we need clarity. We need to understand for ourselves and for everyone around us what really is the story. If you look at all the sikhs, I'll talk about the Yom Kippur Milchama, Intifadas, the terrorist attacks, you'll see one common denominator that goes always back to Tovshin Chov Zayin, that the Yitoka Shefer Godel, the Nisim U'Maila, were not reciprocated from below. So this is not about blaming anyone. It's about what we should be doing now. But the Rebbe had this moral clarity, absolute clarity. I don't know if you know this, But in Tov Shalom at Zion, when the first settlement was returned, Yamit was in northern Sinai, the Sinai desert, before the Camp David Accords. So Yamit was returned, and the Rebbe spoke there at Fabrengen, was very upset about it. You know, the whole idea of giving off land for peace, etc. Shleimus Haaretz. Rabbi Yitzchok Isaac Shvei wrote to the Rebbe and asked the Rebbe, it's only a small little settlement. It's not even on the border. And why is the Rebbe so upset about it? It's not like it's putting anyone into sakana. And the Rebbe wrote something to this effect. I never saw the answer, but I heard it. The Rebbe said, "Be'enai re'isi, sha'rakevet yotza ma'tachana." But I see with my eyes that the train has left the station. And you don't start yelling. You don't start yelling when the train goes off the cliff.
What time
you
you want
yell
to
when
go
it
to
leaves the station. So the Rebbe said. So we clearly had a Rebbe that saw far ahead than all of us.
One second.
Understood.
Sorry. Please, everybody, mute yourselves. Please mute yourselves. Thank you. Continue.
Well, you can mute everyone. I'll unmute myself if you want.
Then my father wrote. Okay, I'll do that.
I think he's muted anyway. Okay. So.
Well, you mute. I'm mute.
Okay. The reason I'm saying all of this is, again, not to talk about negative things. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
The reason I'm saying this is like the Rebbe said, "Dafreden b'schusen shel Yisrael." That's not the question here at all. But the Rambam, when he says about tzara that happens to Klal Yisrael or to Yochid, it's achzorius, insensitive to see it as mikra nikris, you have to introspection. So I think a lot of us don't have clarity, and you must have clarity today because there's so much going on that people, even Eden, are confused. And I'm not, there are people who even say Rachmana litzlan zachen that you should never even hear that Israel's at fault and Israel's the perpetrator, etc. So we have to make it very, very clear, as the Rebbe said many times, that you don't need a religious argument here. The simple siman shin chavtes. You have a sworn enemy. There are enemies from 1948 or even earlier. They've never rejected their call for the annihilation of Eden. That's a sworn enemy. That doesn't mean they have to attack you every day. You just have to know you're living near an enemy who's guilty until proven innocent. And b'meila, there are ways to approach it. So we have to understand that strength here is not because we're tough people. It's because we are protecting ourselves. And I think a lot of people are not aware of the impact. What the Rebbe said, Siman Shin Chavtes, is not just for Israel. It's for France, Naharda, Europe, America, England, Russia, the Rebbe said, wherever people are. The Rebbe used the same Siman Shin Chavtes, by the way, you know what? For Crown Heights, not to leave Crown Heights in the famous Sicha Achar Shapes L'Tov Shin Chavtes. Because it's basically, you have to understand what the matzav is and not try to delude yourself into thinking things are. So, Rachmana litzlan, what happened really is a revelation of their real intentions. So if anything, Yisbaru v'yislabna advarim, Rachmana litzlan, that the Eibishter decided that has to take over 1,000 Eden. It's not an einish. It's the consequences of a whole mistaken approach to everything. The Rebbe said that very clearly back in Tov Shalom Dalet, and he said it very clearly again that he's not blaming anyone. He says it's Yitzrei on some that they never meant it, it wasn't deliberate, etc. So I think it's very vital to know this. I had campus shluchim. I spoke to campus shluchim this morning, over 150 of them. And on the campus is real war going on. There's protests. They've been brainwashed students, Jewish students, professors, sashrek, And I know that it doesn't come close to nefoshes that's going on at Yisrael, but it's the minds of our young people. Shluchim told me they're Pashut students that won't return to Chabad house anymore. Because it comes to this, they suddenly become pro-Palestinian. L'chmana litzlan. So they said, what are we supposed to tell the students? So I said, this is not something, if someone, what happened if Mexico attacked the United States the same way? What do you think would happen by now? And I think,
It would be a parking lot.
Yeah. I once had a liberal professor told me years ago. He said, Israel's making a major mistake. In history, there are only two ways that if you're dealing with enemies, you either kill them all or you expel them all. America killed almost all the Indians. Other countries just expel them all. Now, we're Jews, and we have a very different approach, higher standards, whatever you want to call it. And I think it's critical to just state this, and I think this is why the Rebbe spoke B'Rabbim about it. How many times did he mention Shimon Shin Chavtes? I think, obviously, I should really have begun with something else, but let me just say this. Above all, our hearts, our souls, our prayers go out firstly to the neshamas that were ripped away from us, mamish innocent men, women, and children, mamish like atrocities not seen since the Holocaust. I mean, I don't want to get into any graphic details. I watched some of it simply to get my blood boiling, to get myself mobilized, but schrecklich, unbelievable. So our hearts go out, families.
How schrecklich could it be if it's a consequence of our actions and our doing?
I did not say that at all. Chas v'sholom v'rachman l'tzlan to say that. It's a consequence is not the killing of these Eden. The consequence is not dealing with our enemy properly. It's like saying the Holocaust were atrocities also. We don't, what the Rebbe said, that's not an Einish. Chas v'sholom to say that. So let's not call it consequences. I would say the behavior the attack is a consequence of our actions, but atrocities are atrocities, and that's that. I mean, even when we say Alan Nizik kvar nigzim in Hashemayim, you still say that the mazik will be nenash al rei b'chirose. I mean, this is not forgivable. The Nazis are not absolved, nor are the Hamas absolved of anything they've done. And we have to avenge, like the Rebbe writes in letters, Yimkum Dama of Avadecha, we said it in Yizkor and so on, that so the idea of let's not make a mistake here that we're justifying anything, God forbid. I'm saying for our clarity, we need to understand going forward what is the picture here, that Israel is not the criminal here, the opposite. That's the main point I was making. I want to just continue that I think we need to also push it. Bimargish also, the Rebbe would talk about Sahal as being push it, Mesei Nefesh, young people going out on the front lines, sacrificing themselves for protecting Eden. So I think we need to acknowledge that and say our Baruch Al-Chaim to them. We all know how the Rebbe treated them when they came to 770 and so on. Bechlal considered by the Rebbe like Mamish, Emdim Al Kiddush Hashem. And the Eibishter Shabbat Bechlal, and especially Eretz Yisrael, Eretz Asher Eni Hashem Alekecha Bo Mereish Hashana Vad Achri Shana, that there should be absolutely no more casualties, no more tragedy, and Mekana Lahabu just clean up this mess and go right into the Geula. That's our bracha. But we also have to do what has to be done, b'derech hateva. And with that, I want to just add a few more things I want to add to this whole discussion here. One of the Rebbe's big statements was also that we are not, no matter how many thousands of miles away we are, we have to remember that this is an attack on Eden. Eden is Klal Yisrael, is one Kema Acha Shlema. You attack one Jew, you're attacking all Jews. And if we were there, we'd all be targets. So it's one guf, one neshama, av echad l'kolona. And as such, the Rebbe's emphasis was always that the Milchama is being fought also on our end. There's a Milchama Gashmis, there's a Milchama Ruchnis. Just like Yeyev and David HaMelech, Moshe Rabbeinu and Yeshua. Moshe was Mispalel while they fought the war against Amalek. Same thing with Yeyev and David. And the Rebbe always mobilized, literally, the Miftzoyim. All of them came in the time of Milchama. Tefillin and Mitzvah Tefillin during the 6-day war. Mivtza Mezuzah after the attack on Malot, the terrorist attack in northern Israel. Right after that came the other Mivtzoyim, Mivtza Teira, Bayis Molisforim, and Zdaka in Lamed Dalet. And then the tanks in Lamed Dalet. In Lamed Hey began the Mivtza Neshek and Taras Mishpacha and Kashrus. Lamed Vav was Chinuch. By the end of Lamed Vav was Avis Yisrael. So it's not a coincidence. it was direct war because there are physical weapons, there are spiritual weapons. Tefillin, of course, Ro Kol Amei Oretz, Hashem L'kecha, Ro Kol Amei Oretz, Hashem L'kecha, yeah, Alecho, Mezuzah, Shemer Dalsus Yisrael, and the same thing with other Mivtzayim. You know, we're coming from Sukkot. The Rebbe would quote often the Medrash Anon Tzuchaya, that the Daled Midim again are weapons, the Lulav, the Esrig, and so on. Actually, it's weapons. If you think about them, some of them look like weapons. Rahman al-Islam can be used in the Umazah, but these are weapons of Kedusha. So we are equal partners with the war going in Eretz Yisrael. And as Rabbi Shalom Ber said before, our job is to, with no less passion and no less vigilance, that the soldiers are waking up every morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, or whenever they do, and they're on call 24/7 to protect Eden. We have to have exactly the same amount of passion. The Rebbe once told someone in Yechidus, he was talking to the Rebbe about going to Kollel. He lived in Eretz Yisrael. So the Rebbe asked him, why do you want to go to Kollel? He says, well, he likes to learn Torah. And the Rebbe said, what about the fact that there's Tzahal, the Tzava? He says, that Tzava is for the secular Eden. He dismissed it. It's not for us B'nai Torah. It wasn't a Chabadnik. So the Rebbe said to him, let me ask you, are you going to wake up at the same time a soldier in the Tzahal wakes up in the morning? And you're going to carry 300 pounds on your back when you climb a mountain to learn Torah? Or are you going to wake up 10 o'clock when you're comfortable and having a good breakfast and then a good lunch? And in between, wherever you could fit in learning Torah. In other words, if you go with the vigilance of a Mechamta Shel Torah, by all means. But to be absolved of that, no. My Shver, Rabbi Tzvi Hirsch Gansberg, Olav Shalom. Shalom Ber, you knew him, right? So he came to America in 1947, Tovshin Zion. Him and Goldschmidt and Dubinsky, Motel Dubinsky and what was his name? Goldschmidt Yisrael. Forgot what his first name was. Kalponim. They came 3 Bochum from Tel Aviv. They were Chavedim there. They were Tel Aviv. That's where Rabbi Yel came from later in Tovshin Yud. They came years earlier, Tovshin Zayin. In Tovshin Ches was the Melchemes HaShichur, the Independence War in Israel. My Shver, his father, had 2 other sons, Ichke Gansberg and an older brother, Label Gansberg. So my Shver writes to my Shver's father writes to my Shver in New York, your blood is not more precious than your brother's blood. Come back to Eretz Yisrael and enlist in the war. It was a war of mamish, of life and death. But of course, ask the Rebbe first. So he wrote to the Frierdiker Rebbe. You know what the Frierdiker Rebbe answered him? He said like this: what is the pshat of an arik, of a deserter, in a time of war? Does not mean someone who's not fighting. It's someone who leaves his post. If, for example, his position is head of communications, and he decides, I want to go into the battle zone, that's called a deserter, because they need the communication. If his job is intelligence or something else, everyone has to stay in their post. Your post is to sit here in New York, and learn Torah with the same takif that they're fighting there. And that, if you leave this post, you're a deserter. Unbelievable way of looking at it. But it's not we're not off the hook. We have to be, I think was mentioned before, a living example of what it means. I wanted to comment a bit about the simcha that Shalom Ber was talking about. I don't disagree with anything you said, but I want to clarify just for a little more asius. What does the taka mean? How could you be besimcha when people were not just died, in the worst possible way? Kinderlech, men, women, children, older people. I mean, so I think it's people misunderstand. Simcha, as was mentioned, is not frivolous, instant gratification. You eat a good piece of meat or a pizza or whatever it is, and you're happy for the moment, or you made a lot of money. Simcha is a simchas hachaim, a simchas hanefesh. I remember what simcha state, I think it was Mem Vov maybe. The Rebbe spoke about 7 levels of simcha. And he said the first simcha is the mere fact that the Eibishter put you on this earth with hashlichus is the greatest simcha. He chose you and put you here to do something that only you can accomplish. The Rebbe was magiyat later, all the 7 levels. Very interesting I'm not going to go through all the details there. But the point is, simcha means that you are besimcha of the shlichus that the Eibishter gave you, the shlichus that the Rebbe gives you. And that shlichus is even when there is a situation that is a setback, kavyochel, or a situation that requires crying. That's also part of the shlichus. Because you don't die, we don't lie down and say, I'm demoralized and defeated. We say, we don't know why, steak, we don't know why the Eibishter does things or allowed this. We don't have answers to such questions. Everybody probably knows the story of Rabbi Yisrael Meir Lau, chief rabbi, former chief rabbi. He was in Tovshin Lamed Daled. Interesting. He came to the Rebbe right after the Yom Kippur War the first time. He was a Rov in Netanya at the time. Listen to this. He was a Rov in Netanya, and the Rebbe, he was in Yechidus. The way he told the story, I heard it from him. He said the Rebbe gave him a seat. He sat. The Rebbe said to him, "What's the matzav ruach in Eretz Yisrael?" Remember, after the Yom Kippur War was very different than the euphoria after the 6-Day War. After the 6-Day War, Mamish the Nisim were completely. I mean, Rab Schomberg remembers a lot better, but we all know the euphoria. Basically, the whole Baal Tshuva movement changed dramatically in America when Bob Dylan put on tefillin by the Kaisel. I mean, just suddenly Jews became proud of their Judaism, of Yiddishkeit, of Torah. That was also the Rebbe's big call. Again, you talk about B'Shefer God. Okay, after this Yom Kippur War, where the Eden were caught by surprise, it was arrogance, it was mistakes, very similar to now, unfortunately. So there wasn't exactly, there were over almost 3,000 lives lost, Rahman al-Islam, which was like a major number for a country like Eretz Yisrael. So the mood was not exactly pleasant. Yes, Baruch Hashem, things turned around, and there was an Netzachon and all of that, but it wasn't very pleasant. The Rebbe asked Yisrael Meir Lau, Rabbi Lau, "What's the matzav ruach?" So he said these words, the way I heard the story. He said that Eden fragen, "Was wird sein? Was wird sein? Ma yiyeh? What will be?" He claims that Rebbe grabbed his wrist, Rabbi Lau's wrist, like this, and he said, "Harav Lau, bei Eden fragt man nicht, was wird sein. Man fragt, was geht man tun? Not ma yiyeh, ma naseh." You know, I'm explaining it now. A victim asks what's going to be. Like the Frierdiker Rebbe says, Ein lonu li'ishayin el alavinu shebashamayim is part of the klola. That ki'ilu, we have no power. The Eibishter gives us barachas. Obviously, we rely on the Eibishter. Everything comes from the Maila. But the Eibishter, part of his way of helping us is by giving us tools. He gives us seichel, he gives us midas, he gives us barachas. I've used this story hundreds of times in many situations. It's such an empowering story. What does that mean? We're never victims. And we've suffered more than anybody at the hands of, I don't want to go through every suffering we went through in history, but we never defined ourselves by our suffering. We suffered, but we're not sufferers. You know why? Because our connection to the Eibishter, a connection to Yiddishkeit, to Torah is stronger than any enemy. And to give in to an enemy through fear or feeling I'm there, that person's victim, basically is essentially saying this, they're stronger than the Eibishter. You know, the Rebbe needed to remind us this time and again. A Rebbe is a Rebbe, it's a fir. And this is a critical point. That we ask, what are we going to do? We don't know why. The answer to why, we know, Shtei kachol b'machshave with the Asari Aruge Malchus, Vayidim Aden, Le machshavei. But that people should not mistake that inability to answer the question as weakness. Punkt verkehrt, it's strength. Because though we don't understand, but we fully feel the strength that we can do something about it. So that's why there is simcha. Because at the end of the day, we have not changed. We have not been changed. Ani Hashem leishenisi, ubnei Yisrael leichalisam. There's really no change. Rahman al-Islam, yes, there was a tzara, and we have to grieve and mourn over that, but it's not a stira. I remember there's a sikha from the Rebbe, a very powerful sikha, a tisha, it's connected in of. The Gemara says in where's the Gemara? Gemara in, is it Megillah? Or is it Me'ed Cotton? the word when we say kishem mishenichnas of mamaytim besimcha kach mishenichnas oder marbim besimcha. So the Rebbe asks a very fundamental question: what kind of zustel? Mikate zustel like of is marbim is mamaytim besimcha, of oder is marbim besimcha. What do you say kishem kach? It's bad enough to have of. We have to be reminded also in other that it's like of. And just to add to the Kshaila, similar that Rambam brings, that Moshe was Misakin Shiva Yemei Avelus and Shiva Yemei Simcha, all in the same breath. And the answer that Rebbe explains is because they ain't Eberster. And the Kishem is saying that even the Avelus, even the Mamayit and Besimcha, is also ultimately from the Zelba Eberster, and there's a hidden Simcha there too. And everything negative is ultimately the Kavona, is Kavona Sat Simtsum B'Shvil Hagili. So it doesn't take away from the Tzimtzum. Chassidus says that Tzimtzum is Hepech HaKavona, Hepech HaRotzen. It doesn't say that's the Rotzen Hashem. It's Hepech HaRotzen, because its Kavona is not the Tzimtzum La'atzmei, it's the Gili that comes from it. So what does this mean to say? That yes, there are times we have to cry. Eis Lifkes, there are times we have to cry. But we have to understand that the crying does not define us. The crying is recognizing that there's a fila rega kotna zavticha, you also cry. Rebbe Rashab cried because he didn't see Elokus, like Avram Avinu. The Rebbe cried on Golas. The same Rebbe that's crying, even I remember the Simchas Teda Tov Shemem Zayin, the Rebbe's tears, but at the same time, the very fact that you cry, you're not crying out of weakness. The Alter Rebbe and Tanya makes it clear. This is not atzvus that demoralizes and doesn't motivate. This is a cry that motivates us to do even better, to come out stronger than ever, and to hold on to our dearest values and recognize, I heard today from somebody that the Jews are like a tea bag. You don't know how strong they are until they're put into hot water. Or B'Lashon HaKosuv, Keshayano Esem Ken Yirbe V'Chen Yifretz. So we have to be able to convey this to ourselves and to everyone around us. And everyone knows that Igeris from the Tzemach Tzedek, the night of Chavdalet Tevis, the Istalkus of the Alter Rebbe. I know Rab Sholem Ber was one of the few Yechidim that was there, I think, in Shul when the Rebbe said the Maimer that year. It was the May of Chamishim Shana Kufnun, Shnas Akan. So in the Alter Rebbe's Istalkus, we know was Motzoi Shabbos in the Kfar Piena. And the Tzemach Tzedek was with the Alter Rebbe. He was davening Ma'ariv by the Omid, the Tzemach Tzedek, and he saw the matzav of his grandfather. The Alter Rebbe was Gezen, Sinish Gut. So when he davened Ma'ariv, you could hear in his voice, a broken voice. He was crying. He was very sad. The Alter Rebbe called him over after davening Ma'ariv, and this may be the last words the Alter Rebbe said to him. B'chaim Chayuse Ba'al Medain. He said to him, "Ich gehet from Rebbe, the Magid." On the Kemara Ponim Lamaila, that the Ponim was Mavais Lamato, it does the Ponim was Mavais Lamaila. So famous Zehar, the Rebbe uses very often in Igres. Mavais Ponim Shal Simcha is Kemayim Ponim Leponim, Bakupmena Ponim for Simcha. Mavais Ponim Fun Atzvus Achmon Litzlan, and he finished with that. The Tzemach Tzedek has two letters. There's two versions of the letters. It's kedai to check it out. Doesn't mention the Trach Gut V'Zayin Gut, but the concept. Now, what was the Alter Rebbe saying to him? You shouldn't be sad about the Istalkus. Of course you should be sad, but you have to remember what's most powerful is your fortitude, is the strength you have. I could share with you, I remember this on a personal note. I remember Tov Shemem Ches, like we all do, the Istalkus of the Rebbetzin. I'm saying this because I believe we get strength from the Rebbe, especially in times like this. So we all know, very stark contrast in Tov Chav Hei, when the Rebbe Tzachana was Nistalik, it was far more discreet. That was very private. Kav Yochel can't talk about the Rebbe as a human being, but that was very discreet. I mean, obviously he was sad, we saw it as well, there were b'chiyas, but it was very different. In Memches, the Rebbe couldn't be more bailet in how he expressed his grievance, if you want, if his grief rather. He moved his whole operation to President Street for a year. Everything changed after that. There was no longer Maimorim after a while, no longer Rashi Sichos, Zohar, Pirkei Avos, Ram, everything that Rebbe instituted. Everything changed. And every Fabrengen v'achai yitna libe. It was like the Rebbe in every possible way was making sure to remind us that he is grieving and he's mourning. Again, I'm not going to analyze the Rebbe. I'm not trying to. I remember thinking to myself, why would the Rebbe do that? I mean, we have to know what the Rebbe is going through. And then I remember the Shleishim Sicha. Parsha Pora was Parsha Kisisa, Parsha Pora, Tovshim Memches, Shleishim of the Rebbe. So the Rebbe asked a question then. It was Parsha Pora, Zeis Chukas HaTeira. So it says in Medrash that Eibishter showed Moshe all the Tumas Saras, Tumas Zov, Tumas Nida, etc. And then he showed him the Tara for each one. What's the Tara for each of these Tumas, for these impurities? Came to Tumas Mes, Niskarkim upon of Shalmesha. His face became, they say, pale, green, however you interpret it. He began to tremble. Bameh tehei tarose. What will be the Tara for this? And that's when the Eibishter answered, Zeis chukas hatera, Zeis marabetz boy ve'emer zeh. Here it is, paradum. But the Rebbe was bothered by the Shaila of Moshe. He said these words. I remember it now. It's Mugit today, so it's printed. And the Rebbe said, the Eibishter is doch der was git to Tumme und der was macht the Tara. Why was Moshe suddenly surprised? All the Tumas the Eibishter gave him a Tara, no problem. Suddenly it comes to Tumas Mes, the Skarkim upon a Bametei Tarose. Hashem lokach, Hashem nosan. Then the Rebbe said something even unbelievable. The Rebbe said, Moshe doch gelernt alle Chassidus und hat gewusst die alle Biurim. Yiri de Tzerech Aliyah, an Hashem is Nitzchias, und es sein Tchias HaMesim. Was hat Moshe geat? Es Chochme de Gedusha, es Chochme de Atzilus. Mela, a Poshet to eat, no. But Moshe doch verstanden die alle tiefe Sachen. You can see clearly he was talking about himself as well. And the Rebbe answered to the effect, I remember the exact aces because it was very, very hard to hear even. The Rebbe answered, as when the hearts tut weh, is alle Mechin, and alle Asboris is garnished. So that nicht zerbrochene hearts. I was like, I remember this because I was a chazer, so I had to really remember the sikh as well. I was so shaken by that. I said, why was the Rebbe telling us this about himself? When my father passed away 18 years ago, Tovshin Samachay, I came, my hergish was the Rebbe was telling us, I'm a Rebbe, I'm not just with you in good times. I'm not just with you with simcha. Just like it says, why the Arizal says al-chet. Doesn't have any of the chatoim. But he says it, first of all, because he's a neshama klolis, and second of all, because the dakas, like the story with the Mittler Rebbe. The Rebbe was saying, and it's my own hergish, you could be makabel it fine, if not, is also fine. The Rebbe was saying, I'm with you. And in times of need, when we don't have the words, and we don't have explanations, and people are broken, what we're looking for is strength, not answers, strength. And the Rebbe is saying, I'm with you. Similar to what it says in Medrash, why the Eibishter appeared to Moshe in a sneh. Why didn't it appear in an apple tree or in a beautiful orchard or something? Because the Eibishter was saying, Eined Mulvade Afilu B'sneh, because he was anticipating Moshe is going to say to the Eibishter, you're sending me to take the Eden out of Mitzrayim. The Eden are going to ask me, where are you? And they did ask, where are you? Why aren't you coming and saving us? So in other words, you're only there when things are good. So the Eibishter, anticipating, preempted the question and said, no. I'm with you in a sneh. I'm with you even in sar, even in a sneh, even in a bush that has no petis and it's just prickly and it just has thorns, in a thorn bush. So the Rebbe was saying basically, I'm with you. And it's much harder, obviously, in the times of Nisyanis, when the Helam is strong, it's much harder. But we have to know it's there. I mean, Chassidus makes such a big fuss that even though the Hepech Harotzen Tzimtzum, but it's not Tzimtzum Kipshute, famous letter in Tofrei Sadik Tes with the Rebbe to Rabbi Binyaminson. Nachmiel Binyaminson, he explains all the different shittas about Tzimtzum Kipshute. And then 3 years later, he wrote to Rabbi Binyaminson, I don't know if you understood the message, why by Chabad Chassidus we don't accept Tzimtzum Kipshute. What the implications are. You ever see the letter, the Hemshech? Not the Biur al Pi Chassidus. The Hemshech, he says to Rabbi Chaim, it's telling us that the Tzimtzum is not Kipshute, that wir haben da Moshe Rabbeinu al Har Sinai, and Rashbi in the Idra, and the Arizal, and the Rabbeim, as they are. It was never really, it's only concealed, it's not removed, Chaz v'Shalom. That's the real implication. I think there's tremendous keiches we can get from this, because you don't have answers for people in difficult times. So we don't understand. That doesn't make us weaker, it makes us stronger. And there's a profound simcha in the fact that we are connected and we have a shlichus. Why were we chosen to be here this time in 2023? Tov Shin Pei Dalet. Yeah, Simcha Teda Tov Shin Pei Dalet. Such a day where we celebrate the indestructibility of Yidden. Why is it Simcha Teda? Because it comes after Yom Kippur, when there was Salachti Kidvarecha and Chet Egel. On such a day, this should happen. Makes it even more shocking. But it also teaches us nothing can destroy us. And that's a fact, even B'derech HaTeva. And I feel, it's a Chachmaschem B'naschem Le'enei Kol Ha'amim. Today, you don't need to have proof. 3,500 years ago, you could have been a skeptic and say, who knows what will happen to this Jewish people. But today, no one can argue. We are here. We've prevailed. We've more than prevailed. Survived, thrived more than any nation. All the empires that tried to destroy us are gone completely, and we're here. So I'm not saying this as a nechama to the losses we suffered. This is not bringing back the 6 million from the Holocaust, nor the 1,200, and hopefully it stays at that number, not more. It's bad enough, even one person. But it gives us the strength that we will prevail. And I'll share one more thing before we say l'chaim, and then we can bring further. And I hope, Rab Shalom, they don't think this is a drasha. I'm not giving a drasha. I'm speaking from my heart. Okay? But I want to say this. In Tov Shin Lamed Daled, when the Rebbe said, "Wie kommt es am Machtai Svadus when Eden are be'ez Sora, etc." Then, as you know, there was another Fabring in Chalamet Sukkos. Then the Rebbe made a sima Masechta Chala, spoke then about going into Syria, into Damascus, and then into Cairo. So I don't know how many people know this, but there was a levaya, I think, out of Sukkot or 2 days before Sukkot. In Leilin, it was a levaya. The Rebbe would go out to the levaya, walk till Kingston Avenue. On his way back, he sees my father. So I know the story firsthand. My father is standing on the side. The Rebbe motioned to him to come over. The Rebbe was walking with him back slowly. I think he spent almost 20 minutes talking to him in front of 770. And he said to my father that he wants to give him an official interview for the Allgemein. And that's when the Rebbe said for the first time, as Zog Admedavgein in Damesek, on bis Cairo, not for a par minute or a par teg. The point is, you have to completely demoralize them. And the Rebbe was speaking with passion and so on. My father then made a special, the Allgemein was a weekly, he made a second edition that week, just a special edition with the Rebbe's interview and so on. And if you look at the Teichen, the spirit of these sikhs, and this, you call it interview, whatever you want to call it, you see one thing. The Rebbe wasn't just giving military strategy here. He was the confidence that a commander-in-chief has that we are going to prevail. And a commander-in-chief that cannot afford to sit down and just cry over the losses. Not because he's not in pain, but because we have a mission to do. And we forge ahead. And we don't ask why, we ask what are we going to do. This is the spirit of all the sikhs. We are shluchim, children of the Rebbe. We have the Rebbe's keiches. Whether we earned it or not, everyone can figure out on their own. But the minimum is that exactly what was said earlier. I think Rabbi Shalom Bez said it. I think Shmuley said it, that people are looking at us. And if they're not, they should be. And that is, we are now can make an unbelievable Kiddush Hashem. These are the times where you see the men rise, the men from the boys. The people who cower in fear, the people who stand on the sidelines and don't do anything. We cannot afford. We are in war. And the war is a Ruchni Zdike just as it's a Gashmi Zdike. And if anything we learn from the Rebbe is that we need to rise to the occasion and demonstrate that we will forge ahead. Am Yisrael Chai, together with Teres Chaim, together with Shleimus Haaretz. We have the moral, what we call it, the moral certainty, moral conviction. There's no sfekas. There's no room for sfekas. There's room for just going forward. Do we all have questions? Yes, there are many, many questions. Obviously the biggest question everyone's asking, besides what the Eibishter, the other question is, how did this happen? Israel was able to catch one terrorist crossing her. We all have burglar alarms. Your camera in front of your house catches someone walking by your house. What happened here? But I don't think this is the time now. I'm sure there'll be plenty of investigations and so on. So questions, we have many. But in time of war, we can't afford to sit around and ask questions. We're soldiers, and soldiers forge ahead. Friedrich Rebbe has a sikh in Tovshin. He says, Mir dafen an armee. Friedrich Rebbe said the other way around. He said, Heint is the Soldaten meinen, as they sein General. Mir dafen an armee, with the Generalen wissen, as they sein Soldaten. We need an army where the generals know their soldiers, not the other way around. I always use this whenever I speak in Crown Heights or to Lomdim and to Yerushalayim like yourselves. I always tell the joke that the Tsar sent his soldiers to go find Jews hiding from the draft in the Tsarist Russia. The Jews, they come into one house and there's no one there, but then they see behind the curtain, the rustling curtain, they see 2 pairs of feet. They open it up. It's 90-year-old Alte Eden. They say, what are you hiding from? What are you hiding from? You're 90 years old. They said, und General darf den nicht haben. So so we need soldiers. And a soldier, as the Rebbe says, even when a schloft is a soldat. And this is the time that you really see who rises to the occasion. So it's not a small time. This is a moment in history that will not, Baruch Hashem and Mitzvah Hashem, Le'hoya never happen again. We're going to go to the Gula and we will prevail. But this is the time when you have to show leadership in the biggest possible way. It's beautiful to see the Achdus in Eretz Yisrael, the vigils, the gatherings. I was in California for the last days of Yontif. I saw the children's rallies, I'm sure, in all the different cities. Remember, the Rebbe gave us clear Heiros. Tovshin Lamedal, the Rebbe said, Niva v'layoda ma niva, on pi'elin v'yenkim yisada ta'ez, lahashbis evim isnakim, the focus on children. So we have plenty of tools, and plenty of offensive tools, ruchnizdika tools, to bring and lift up the morale and the spirit. But you always acknowledge, and that's why I think it's important. You don't begin by ignoring. You acknowledge we have suffered, we have been hurt, but we're not broken. We have broken hearts, but our resolve remains extremely strong, stronger than ever. And we become, and the Eden will prevail. The Rebbe says in so many different ways. And there's no question, I just saw someone sent me a clip of an article from Tovshin Lamed Daled, I think on this actual day in October 10th, is it? October 10th was today, earlier today. And the Rebbe says that Eden, let me tell you the Loshen, Menatzeach kol milchama. Every war they ever fought, they were Menatzeach. So that doesn't justify, that doesn't minimize what went on, but we shall prevail. And hopefully our Achdus. And I want to just conclude this piece, at least, of Fabrengen. Achdus. What did the Rebbe say about Achdus? And for Gven Achdus Vishach Sidim, or Mashiach Shen Gven lying. The Rebbe speaks about, I don't want to say all the negatives, Anshe Avshalom, even though they were the enemy, but they were Ba'achdus. Achdus brings brachas. On the other hand, Anshe David, even though they were in the right, but when there's no Achdus, I don't want to say the end of the sentence. So Achdus in one part of the world brings Achdus everywhere. I know we've heard this many times, all the Zoom calls and the conference calls and everything, Achdus, Achdus. But I think all of us can take a little look in our own hearts and maybe make up with somebody, maybe forgive someone or ask for forgiveness and just repair rifts. At the end of the day, that's what we're told. Shalom, Achdus. And the Rebbe cried. I mean, how much did he cry over Achdus and Ahavas Yisrael? So I think that's something that each of us have to work on. I know it's always easier to say, I'm completely ready. It's always the other party. But, Yadinish benafshe, we're halten them. And l'chaim to everybody, l'chaim to us, l'chaim to the Eden, Brüder and Schwester, as Reb Schomberg quoted the Rebbe, put him, I'm sorry, like Be'emet Tovshin Chav Zayin, they should have only brachas and mesati shalom ba'aretz. and we should do our part in the Ruchnis Dikamulchame here, L'chaim, L'chaim, and we should be zecher to be reunited with the Rebbe and reunited with all the neshamas, and the Gula Amitis Vashlema, Gula Protis, and Gula Klolis. L'chaim, L'chaim. I would like to hear maybe from all you guys this question I've been getting from a lot of shluchim and other people. How do you explain the Rebbe's words that Eretz Yisrael is the safest place on earth today? I know it's a kasha you could say we don't have an answer, but what can we say, Asius, that would, I mean, I have some thoughts on it, but anybody want to comment on that?
Well, it's not like there haven't been mass shootings or murders or things like that in other countries. So I'm not saying that justifies b'derech hatava what happened and how we explain that, but I don't know. I'm just
No, I understand that kol drachim b'cheskes sakana, and sakonas are everywhere, and Jews have been attacked. The Holocaust didn't happen at Israel, and neither did the different attacks on shuls, Rahman al-Islam.
The question is, how and can we compare it to what happened to Tafshin and Aleph when the Rebbe was saying B'Poyel that it's the safest place, and we all saw that with our clear eyes, and how do we apply that today, B'derech HaTeva?
Okay. Look, you could also say it goes into the same question why the Eibishter would let such a thing happen, and it's like from the shilas that we may never have an answer for. I think that Rebbe may have addressed something similar in Tafshin Tezayin by that massacre of the Yad. What was it called? In the Kfar Chabad. The Rebbe, I think, addressed something like that, like why such a thing could happen. But the Rebbe's approach again then was to build and build. Chiyuv was always the ultimate answer. Absalom Bet, did the Rebbe say something about that? He said something, I think, very sharp about why the Eibishter would allow such a thing to happen. I remember now. Yad Chamisha. Yeah. What I come to realize is, like I said it earlier about Mashke, the previous generation, with all respect to your father, I don't know if he's here, they live in a different world, different reality. There's a different sprach today that's necessary to convey the Rebbe's message. It's not just, it's not, there's people, ultimately is dvarim hayetzim el halev nechnasim el halev. If you can't do that, and you see it in real life, be able to both empathize, converse, and ultimately lead people to a healthy place. There's a lot of, I was also a Talmud of Rabbi Yeil's, but with all respect, he didn't have a lot of emotional intelligence, So, and today you need emotional intelligence. We're not living in a shtetl. We have many Chassidish, and emotional intelligence requires a whole aspect of it's not like it's Elevel Dibur Kim Chaim. You live in a shtetl, you live in Lubavitch, Temchet Mimim. Today, you have to have sprach, you have to have language that speaks to people. Everybody can understand that certain questions you don't have answers for, like questions of this nature. But to completely ignore questions is also not an idea. So you have to have a combination of what we spoke about. I think I said everything I had to say, to be honest. Obviously, we can continue to fabring forever. I'm not opposed to that.
I think in situations like these, it's a weird thing to say, but you see that we know that everything comes from the Eibishter. We believe that everything comes from the Eibishter. Everything. We're all living in the Eibishter's. What do they call it nowadays? They have an English word. A guy comes to me. He's the whole work about. We're living in a simulation. We're all living in the Eibishter simulation. There's nothing here outside of the Eibishter. But so it means the fact that this thing happened, the Eibishter not only signed off on the Eibishter. I think in this event, how gruesome, how it is gross, and how insane it is the Eibishter. The Eibishter was there. Now, what does that mean? The Eibishter is there. No one knows what that means. But you feel that the Eibishter is there because it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense even on a Gashmistic level. It doesn't make any sense on a Gashmistic level. Like, what is Israel suddenly a bunch of idiots? Like to this level? I heard a BBC. I was driving somewhere, so I pulled up my Spotify. A BBC reporting, disgusting reporting, obviously. Two sides of the conflict. They've lost people on both sides. But they were interviewed one of the Israelis that escaped, and for 3 hours they were shooting and nobody was there. She's like, I can't believe nobody was there. Nobody came for them for 3 hours. You had 1,000 terrorists and they're mowing people down. That defies even Teva that gather. Like, it doesn't. So it was the Eibishter. Now, what does that mean? What does anything mean? But it's definitely some sort of
there's no real silver lining, but one thing that war does, it tends to crystallize your values and what you stand for, what you're ready to fight for. And unfortunately, sometimes it takes tragedy to wake people up. To me, it's like Izbaru Islam Nadvorim, the fact that better to know your enemy than not to. And a lot of the analysts are saying that Israel thought that the enemy was gone. They thought Hamas has changed its ways. It's going to now, work on the economy, etc. You see, what's so wise about Siman Shin of Tez that the Rebbe used so often is that two things. We're not blind. We know that we have to deal with an enemy. We don't, even though we know that God is everywhere and the goodness is everywhere, and even a guy has goodness, etc. But once a person has proven that they're an enemy, you need to be aware. You never forget that until proven otherwise. On the other hand, that still doesn't make us into warriors. Kiseitza Muhammad, the Rebbe always emphasized, Kiseitza, you go out to war. It's not you. It's outside of you. Alevecha. And that combination, if you really think about it, is just absolutely brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant because it gives you psychological tools. It gives you a real approach to life, that you can look at an enemy. There are those that turn the Gandhi approach. You turn the other cheek. You ignore it. No. We don't ignore evil. The Torah is very unequivocal about how you deal with evil. At the same time, you don't become an executor. We never become murderers. Even the one instance Pinchas does some kanois, so it's considered to be an exception. And it's Dafke Pinchas, who was a mild-mannered person, and Brisi Shalom. It's not like advocating. If it was someone like Shimon and Levi, look what happened. They were aggressive people. Pinchas was the opposite. So, Judaism, even the David HaMelech shedding blood, can't build a Beis Hamikdash. Dam Rav Shafachta. That's it. Doesn't matter who you are. Melchama shel mitzvah, Melchama l'sham shamayim. You shed blood, you can't build my Beis Hamikdash. I mean, that combination of such absolute pursuit of peace, at the same time being very clear-eyed who your enemy is, it's not an easy thing to balance. Because usually, we're not like Yadayim Yadei Esav,